Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, and today I am joined by Felicity Cowie. Felicity is a consultant who works in the area of communications, helping organisations to work with the media to get their messaging right, to be able to have effective communications. Yet her career history is really interesting. She worked in newsrooms and in newspapers as a journalist for many years. And that kind of high speed, high energy ability to communicate quickly and accurately has really driven her throughout her career. I really enjoyed this conversation where we touched on things like what the atmosphere is like, the highs, the lows, the challenges of being in those newsrooms, and what are some of the things that organisations can do to help be better at this challenge, which causes a lot of workload for a lot of people around their communications. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I am delighted today to be joined by Felicity Cowie for our conversation. But rather than me introduce you, Felicity, can I hand over to you? Can you tell us who you are, what you do, and maybe also a little bit of your career story? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, hi Beth. So my name is Felicity Cowie. I'm a communications trainer and a consultant. And I've been doing that for about 10 or 12 years, helping businesses communicate about what they do in lots of different ways. But a lot of it is around how they communicate with stakeholders and the public via the media. So how they work with journalists. And the reason that I think that they use me for that is because I used to be a journalist. So I know how journalists and newsrooms think, and I can bring that kind of awareness into what the business wants to do and help them kind of like navigate that sometimes quite complicated landscape. But when I was very young, I knew, like, just for as far back as I can remember, I knew that I wanted to write and I wanted to storytell. And even at a very young age, I was conscious that if I wanted to spend my life doing that, I was going to have to find a way of making money to do it. And so that is kind of like how I sort of became a journalist, because it sort of seemed like, okay, great, I could get to write and I'll get paid for it. And so I started working as a journalist in local papers. And then eventually I worked for the BBC, for all its major news outlets, primarily the BBC News Channel, and then for Panorama. And then, I then sort of crossed the floor, as it were, and now I help businesses not just work with journalists, but sometimes use the skills that journalists have to communicate really rapidly, to find out what their headlines are, and to engage other people quite quickly in what they're doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. There are so many things that I'm interested in. I'm going to ask you loads of questions about, if that's all right.
Yeah, great.
Brilliant. So thinking about this space of kind of knowing when you're really young what it is you want to do, and I find that people tend to fit into a couple of categories here. They either have absolute clarity that they want to kind of write and storytell, etc., or they have absolutely no idea and they kind of follow a more a path of let's find out. So knowing so specifically that you wanted to write and you wanted to storytell, how did you get into that world of being able to be in a newsroom, being able to be a journalist?
Yeah, I think again, like from like a really early age, I was always like writing stuff. Because I remember my mum was learning, she was doing like a evening class to do some secretarial work, and she brought home this little blue typewriter, which had all the keys covered, because she was obviously learning touch typing, I guess. And I really must have been about between 5 and 7, because I can remember the house that we were in, and I was completely obsessed with this typewriter. Like, I put my hands on it all the time. I was like trying to type stuff. I don't know if it's like some kind of like weird past life thing or something, but the reaction to kind of anything to do with writing has always been very strong in me. And I've worked as a journalist, but I've written fiction as well. I've done songwriting and stuff in Nashville. I think I just have this kind of like I don't know what it is, like a curiosity or a kind of a vocation to just jump in and give things a go. So with journalism, it's not so much that I thought I will be a journalist. I mean, I've got friends who, like, from very young age wanted to, it was very clear they wanted to do that. Again, for me, it was the writing thing, but I was writing stuff and I was submitting it to like comics and things like, Letter of the Week or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think when I saw my name in print, that was also another like, ooh, that's very exciting kind of feeling. And so I then started working for local newspapers where I was when I was at school, but then when I was a student as well. And so I actually ended up kind of, by the time I was graduating from, I did an English literature degree, I actually had quite a lot of stuff I had done. And so that helped me get a job at a local paper, in fact, a traineeship. So they sponsored me and trained me and everything. It was an amazing opportunity. Um, and so that, once I was in with that kind of opened all sorts of doors.
Amazing. So actually kind of taking it and doing it alongside your studying, not waiting to finish to then go and find it, kind of allowed that path to maybe a little bit smoother than people who finish a degree and try and find somewhere to go.
Yeah, it did. That did work for me. But I think in some ways there was an awful lot of luck involved in it, because I remember when I was a student in Canterbury, I worked in a clothes shop, and my job all day was just folding up clothes. It was so boring, as you'd imagine. And then by complete kind of luck, really, the local paper back at home in Wiltshire, which I had done bits of free work for, just written little stories ever since I'd been at school. They kind of said to me, "Oh, they're looking back on it now. Their reporter was obviously quite junior, but to me he seemed like like really old." They were, "Oh, he's going to Glastonbury for 10 days. Would you mind covering for him?" um,
They're probably thinking, "Oh, there's someone cheap here that we can get
well,
involved."
totally. They were like, "We'll pay you I think it was like £35 a day." But like back in the mid-90s, I was like, "Oh my god,
not too bad." Yeah.
So I ditched the jumper folding job without a moment's hesitation. I went back home and I did this this job for like 10 days, got the money, and yeah, so there were things like that were, yeah, of course I put myself in a position where that could happen, but I mean that was slightly lucky, I think. And then I was kind of supervised by people who were like in another office. But yeah, I just kind of sort of wandered around the town finding things to write about and wrote stories to fill up the pages of the local newspaper. And then of course I had like my byline, my name was all over it then, because I was, and that, yeah, I mean, that really I did think then, gosh, that was fun. And, and journalism is not a well-paid profession, and especially not in a local newspaper role. So it's not like you kind of think, great, I've hit on a way of earning a lot of money. And actually, for young people now, with the cost of a degree and stuff like that, it is a difficult profession, I think, to to hit decent money straight off. But I was very fortunate in that because I'm in my late 40s, that I actually had a free university education, and so I was able to leave without any debt and start off in a fairly low paid but perfect job for me. So
yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing, isn't it, as well, about like how careers are now versus how careers started previously and how difficult it can be right now. But I also love what you're talking about there about luck, and so much of it is putting yourself in the right position and hoping some stuff will happen and allowing that stuff to happen. But you could have said, "Oh no, I need to continue my job folding clothes, folding jumpers." I do have a very important question for you. Does this mean you're now really excellent at folding your clothes?
Actually, it does. and it's a thing I learned when I was about, I don't know, 18 or something. And these things really stick in your brain, don't they? And it's ridiculous. Yeah. I will sort of fold up jumpers like really, really quickly. And I'll look at them in a shop sometimes and think, I think no, walk away.
It's so funny. One of my first jobs was in a Clark's shoe shop fitting kids' shoes. And I did it for quite a long time while I was a student. And the other day I was with my friend and her son, and we went to shopping. And she was like, "Beth, just tell me, do these shoes fit?" And I was like, "Okay, I haven't done this for 20 years, but it's still there. I still know exactly how to do it. I still know all the codes for the computer system." And you're like, why is that in my brain? But why can't I find my glasses? I don't understand.
I know, it is very true. Like those early skills get very, get very hardwired into us, I suppose, don't they?
Yeah.
Actually, I do feel very, very blessed that happened to me with not the jumper folding so much, but although that is as useful, but with journalism, because I think that very early on and very consistently, and I suppose definitely my whole working life, there's been a kind of constant kind of use of that muscle of writing, of thinking about words, and I do actually find writing quite hard. I do find it a bit like a Rubik's cube, like trying to solve it and get everything in the right to work. But I think I am lucky that there's kind of like patterns for that were laid quite young, I suppose, in my
Yeah.
mind, and so I have quite a lot to draw on. I feel like that does give me confidence when I go into kind of like quite new and difficult situations. I've got quite a wealth of skills that I've repeated over and over and over again in lots of circumstances to fall back on.
Yeah, and kind of that getting deep into the skill and starting early with it and building it means it's really well there.
Yeah,
And can I talk to you a little bit about the newsroom side of
yeah.
life and when you moved into that? Tell me, how did you go from transitioning from kind of the writing world into the news world?
Well, I suppose it was the training course. When I was offered this job with the local paper in the Kent Messenger Group in Canterbury when I was a student, it came with this. It was really quite an amazing opportunity. It was a sort of a 2-year job, and the first 20 weeks of that, half of the year I think, were based in a training centre, kind of learning all of these journalism skills. It was a really difficult course, and at the time it was nicknamed the SAS of newspaper journalism. A lot of like quite well-known journalists ahead of me had done it, so it was a good course, but oh my gosh, it was very hard. And so I think that that probably was the main bridge that sort of took me from one thing to the other. I mean, it was funny as well, like starting working in a newsroom, and because I'd gone there straight from university, and it was just the opposite. It was like unlearn everything, because it was like write short, don't write long.
Yeah.
The word counts were all much shorter than like for essays and things like that. And it was just I mean, I wasn't very good, I have to say. I really struggled a lot in the first few months of being at the paper, and on the training course. It was very fast paced, and I think I was poorly for a week in the middle, and I was always struggling to catch up and stuff like that. But I do think that I was very lucky in that I was taught. A lot of people made a lot of effort to teach me, and I wanted to learn. So I think that probably stood me in good stead for what was to come. And they did teach you stuff which, I mean, like one of the lessons that they taught us on day one was about like asking 6 questions, and like journalists asking 6 questions all the time, which is the who, what, why, where, when, and how.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that's taught, in law enforcement as well. And, Aristotle wrote about it. And I think there's a Kipling poem. It's not like it's specific to journalism, but it's so crucial to the training of like, that's how you do stuff. And I did find that has stuck to this day. I use that with clients all the time. And that was like, provided a bit of a safety net for me when I would sort of feel really daunted by what I was doing. I would remember that, and I sort of start trying to ask the questions and unpacking the information with those questions. And that would kind of like give me a bit of confidence and sort of like ease me into the writing a bit.
Amazing. And I ask these questions to people all the time as well. I think they're so important for not just accepting things as they are, but understanding motivation, understanding what's going on at a deeper level, being able to move past it. So yeah, I totally get that, why that would be helpful in many, many, many different situations.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about when you moved into kind of doing BBC, looking at, News 24, working on Panorama, in that kind of, what I've got in my head, probably what a fictional TV show has taught me about that kind of newsroom side of things. And I want to know, I imagine fast-paced, hard work, really tough deadlines, trying to get stuff done, trying to make things as good as they can be. Talk to us a little bit about the environment there, because I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean that is true. So when I went to work I worked for the BBC first of all in Southampton, which was it was quite a large room, but I mean it was a regional newsroom, so it was smaller. I was only there for maybe I think about a year, 14 months, and then I went to work for the main BBC newsroom, which at the time was in Television Centre. Now it's not; it's in New Broadcasting House. And that, oh my god, like you sort of like open the door, and it was just like I don't know, like 300 people in there. It was really noisy, like loads of chat and stuff like that. And there's a tannoy going off all the time with breaking news and announcements and things like this. And it was really, a very busy environment, as you would imagine in the daytime. I mean, but there could be times where it was very, very quiet, and it was all shift work as well. So there were some times where you're sort of sitting there and you're thinking, God, an hour is a long time.
And is there actually any news to report?
Yeah, and I would be like writing like the summaries for the the radio bulletins for the top of each hour, because I started in radio and then I did stuff in telly. and actually in the BBC, they kind of, you do a mixture of both. They'd kind of, they'd gone through a bit of a drive to help skill people in both areas. Well, when I got there, I was lucky. But yeah, so sometimes you would be like writing the bulletin, and then you'd read it, and then you'd always like sort of like tweak it around a bit, and then you'd be ready for the next hour. And then if nothing happened, you're kind of like,
I tweak it again.
Yeah, so it wasn't always as there were downtimes and stuff like that, which I think is fair to share. But then they were good as well, because you're always in quite big teams of people, so there was always lots of it was, I always found it very interesting, like what other people were doing. And I think again, it's the writing obsession. So when I joined, when I first worked at Television Centre, I think I was probably the most junior person in the whole newsroom. I had like definitely the sort of like lowest of the low role there, and I sort of sit there on the desk, but everybody else on the desk was writing the bulletins for the main, like Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as it was back then, outlets. And then like maybe 2 meters away from me, so just the other side of this kind of aisle, was the whole 6 o'clock news team, and Hugh Edwards is sitting there, like he would sort of come in, this whole sort of ball of energy kind of thing, and would be like typing away and chatting and writing everything. So I was like completely surrounded by people who were real masters at what they were doing it for different outlets, all this writing going on. So it was an amazing atmosphere to be in, to learn stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's on News 24, or the BBC News Channel as it's now called, in some ways you do have deadlines, because you obviously have the headlines at the top of the hour, and the half headlines at the half hour, and the weather and things like that. But if a big story breaks, it's almost like you're always on deadline then, because it's the races to deliver the story as accurately and as quickly as possible. So you almost end up in this kind of permanent state of deadline, I suppose. Which, yeah, that could be extremely intense. And especially, I worked on some quite big stories that broke on, say, Sundays or Boxing Day or something like that, where we had less, smaller teams. So you really did have to kind of ramp up what you were doing very quickly in those circumstances.
And it's really interesting you talk about kind of that journey through kind of being the most junior person in the newsroom. But there's something there, isn't there, about how you learn from the people around you, and how you kind of pick up on how to do stuff by, I call it like the learning osmosis stuff. It's like you're just watching people and seeing how they're doing stuff, and reading other people's ways of writing. That must have been a really intense education, as well as kind of an intense period of working and kind of always having to be really on it.
Yes, it was, I suppose. But I mean, I did like it, because I do think I really like. I mean, I liked the sort of seeing how quickly things turned into reality, as it were. If that makes sense. So a story would break, and it would be like, right, how are we going to cover this? And you'd be sort of like you'd be sort of thinking through writing, I suppose. And I quite liked that. I like doing that myself anyway, but it was just amazing to watch some other people doing that, and the speed at which they would do it. I mean, I have to say, having left journalism and then gone into work in loads of other places and worked in the corporate world and all that, I do think it is actually quite almost superhuman, like their ability for journalists to communicate with each other, and how rapidly they can get to the heart of something, turn it into just shorthand, bullet points, so that they can get each other up to speed, and then how they then turn that into very engaging content for audiences. I mean, it's just it happens about 100 times faster than anywhere else I think I've ever worked.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about that speed and having the need to be both speedy and accurate. And in my head, I can be really quick, but I'm not sure how brilliant I would be. Or I could be really accurate, but I'm not sure how speedy I could be. And the combination of those factors together is something a bit special. It
is genuinely difficult. And, a lot of organizations that I have worked with or supported through, say, training and development stuff, they'll have, as part of their 5 corporate values, it will be like, be fast, be accurate, will be in amongst there. They're not news organizations. They're just, they're maybe like deliver data, or, they publish some sort of stuff. And it's actually very hard to do both. Having them as 2 corporate values is, you often have to, there's a balance between the 2, and sometimes you have to sacrifice one to meet the other. And as a journalist, it was always, the BBC, like, so we News 24, we would have in the gallery where we would be be outputting the program. There would be loads and loads of television screens, like you can imagine, because you sort of see this all the time. And on the other screens would be all the other news channels. So Sky would be there at the time. ITV had a 24-hour news channel, international news channels as well. So you'd be in the gallery looking at what you were putting out, but you'd also be looking at what other channels were doing. And if they were breaking stuff ahead of you or had got something ahead of you, that was a source of deep consternation. So there was a kind of a pressure there, but then this is maybe unfair on other broadcasters, but I think there was a real pressure on there is a big pressure on the BBC to be accurate, perhaps slightly more than perhaps some other broadcasters. So for the BBC to kind of report something incorrectly and wrong seemed to be more of a crime than for other broadcasters to make that mistake and then say, oh no, sorry, we jumped the gun there a bit, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about this environment because I'm always thinking about like where's the place where people kind of get their joy from at work and what's the great stuff. And for me, that all sounds super exciting. Like the pressure, I'd love it. And you've got to get it done. And then it's on the telly and you can see the results of your work like really quick, like instant results. It's like pressure washing a patio. You can see what's happening immediately. I am like delighted by it. But I'm also thinking that, we think about different environments for different people. That environment would just be horrific for somebody else, like the noise and the pressure and the kind of having to do it all at speed and lots of people doing different things and taking in all this information. For some people, that would be the worst.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, and also you're not always the same person. I mean, some days I would just find the whole thing quite daunting and other days I would be really up for it. It just, and there were some stories as well that were really hard to cover. So, that would start to kind of like have an impact on you as well. And just the tiredness. I mean, some big stories, like I covered the 7/7 bombings in London as that story was breaking and sort of all the way through. That was a very, very difficult day. And I also covered the Boxing Day tsunami, the tsunami back in, I think it was in 2004 as it turned into 2005. And that was just, days and days of reporting on that was very, very challenging indeed. So I think, and it was challenging for everybody. And, even seasoned correspondents who had worked for the BBC for years, like some of them were like wanting to take a moment before they went on air with their reports and stuff like that. And you do also get, you're kind of bombarded with pictures from news agencies all around the world, which don't, get turned into sort of like, they're not put on national television, but there's this kind of stuff around you. So it's without a doubt a very challenging environment to work in. And that's just, it's an office. You're not out there, but you're kind of, you're working in that environment and dealing with all of that. It is hard without a doubt. And I think and I don't want to glamorize it because you can look back on it and think, gosh, it was amazing doing all of that. But there certainly were times it was very difficult for all of us. And because you have to keep going because, you've got this kind of air to fill all the time.
It's like, really... we couldn't be bothered. We went for an extra coffee.
That's the thing that is quite sort of, I think that journalists have this thing in common, and it's such a, it's just not true, I don't think, in other organizations, this kind of like this deadline thing of like, you can't have like dead air or like an empty page. So there is this common mission or goal, like to get this done, and I think that so because of that, you really have to kind of like dig in and just get on with stuff. So it's a, without a doubt, very, very challenging environment to work in. But talking more about the joy of it, I think for me, the writing, with other people, kind of like just sort of getting those words out together, matching pictures to the words or words to the pictures. There was something that I did find, even when it was a difficult story. In fact, sometimes, especially then, because you want to do, you really want to get it right the way you're breaking this for people and they're seeing it in their homes and all of that. It did feel that kind of like putting that all together as a group of people did feel very meaningful to me. And I was very proud to be part of all of that.
Yeah. And I love this because I always talk about the fact that you don't get WorkJoy 100% of the time. You said, there are days when you go in and it's like, oh, I'm not sure about that. There are really tough days, like being exposed to the toughest parts of like the human experience and being there, I imagine, at the greatest moments in time as well. And you have, it sounds like a job where you have like the full range of human emotion almost every day going on.
Yeah. Yes. And it's all a bit larger than life, I suppose, as well, because it is literally all amplified. Well, there was, I mean, I think as well, there's like and I know that I've worked when I've done stories with people who work in, emergency services or whatever, there is this kind of sense of humor as well around it all, which, I mean, you really do. I think you can find sort of connections with people in this kind of like rather strange environment that are quite meaningful. And I mean, even now I'll meet up with people that I worked with like 20 years ago, and we'll remember something that happened, and we're both like, the way that we made a mistake or did something, whatever, I don't know, and we'll both be like rolling around the floor laughing, just going, I can't believe that. I mean, some of it was so funny, like just as a so I think the teamwork thing there just seemed to me very strong, because it really is the only, I mean, especially in television, it's the only way you can actually make anything happen is working as a team. To some extent, working in a newspaper, you just need your notepad and your pencil, you go around, you interview somebody, and you can get the interview, that's kind of on you. Then obviously you need the rest of people to help get it into a newspaper. But with television, even just getting the interview together involves quite a team of people, especially if it's live, so I think that kind of working together, the sense of achievement in sort of achieving things was was very high.
And I'm really interested in what you said about you're writing together, and so you've come from this kind of writing background forever, you've always had that. I am definitely on the talking side and have like learned to be the writer later on, and I never think, I'm fascinated, and I'm going to go and think about this more, but I never think about writing as a team activity. I think about writing as a real solo activity, and one that I kind of have to sit down and get on with.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I've worked with quite a lot of people who've got a real fear of writing because I think the way that, I mean, as I said, I'm in my late 40s, and maybe it's different now, but I think that like when I went through school, it was kind of like you're a words person or a numbers person. And a lot of people who lead businesses identify as numbers people because it is kind of quite a common route to be, say, a chief finance officer, and then you become a chief exec. And I have worked with some chief execs or sort of like, leaders of organizations who are very dyslexic as well. And that maybe wasn't diagnosed at school. So they've sort of, so for lots of reasons, they can be really very worried about the whole idea about writing and just sort of want to kind of like get a consultant in to do it and then give it to them. But I'm very like, I can't do that because the ideas are in your head and we need to get them out, and then we can pretty them up, whatever, with the writing, but the coming out of your head, it has to come from you, and you're going to have to find a way of, that's just the way it is as a human. You're going to have to find a way of putting that into words, because that's the only way that we're going to understand it. Because I've worked with chief execs who'll sort of say to me, well, they're getting frustrated with their teams and maybe their transformation project isn't happening as quickly as they like, and they'll say, it's all very clear in my head. And I'm like, I know, but the thing is, that's the difficulty. It's in your head.
Nobody can be in there with you.
No, and then the next thing they'll sometimes say is, well, there's the PowerPoint. And I'll be like, is there really? And
of course there is.
You go and find it, and it's hidden in some like drive that nobody's used for about 5 years. And it's like always, for some reason, like 67 slides long. I don't know why. And I'm like, this just isn't, this is just not going to cut it. Like, nobody's going to read this. And even if they did, it's far too open to interpretation, because it's just, So, I mean, I have worked with people a lot to, I think that is a barrier, that they have, this very deep-seated fear of words, of writing, of, whatever. And this sense of like massive discomfort when asked to kind of put their thoughts into words, even though they may be very, very good at talking. It's a really strange, it's not that they're not good at talking. I think it's just that skill of converting ideas into words and then being able to share them with people is actually it is a very mysterious process, really, when you think about it. It kind of blows my mind that it's like spells almost, isn't it? If you think you read a book and you're kind of like just looking at like some marks on a bit of paper with some ink and you're kind of like crying or laughing, I mean, that's just sort of like wild, isn't it, really?
I mean, that we've gone very philosophical into that particular place, isn't it? Like, actually, what is even writing? Does it even exist? Is it a real thing? But I'm really interested in this. I think it's really interesting, this idea that actually, and I hear this all the time, so I'm going to reverse myself a little bit and come into the context of what I was about to say, because that would be helpful. When it comes to kind of WorkJoy and Workloom, a lot of work gloom, a lot of the stuff that comes out time and time again in people's engagement surveys and organizations is the communications around here aren't good enough.
Yeah.
Right. That is probably, if I were to add it up over the last 20 years and all of the different engagement things I've seen from lots of different organizations, it probably comes top 3 every single time about communications.
Yeah.
And people don't think they get enough. People think they get too much. It's the wrong media. It's the wrong message. And it's a really, really, really hard thing to get right. And I was just reflecting when you were talking there about we're trying to get things out of people's heads and into like dots on a paper, on a piece of paper, and then into a message that makes sense to other people, not how it makes sense in your head. Because just because it makes sense in my head doesn't mean if I tell you it will make sense in yours.
No, exactly. It's massively undervalued how complicated that is, I think.
Yeah.
And you know, people almost feel like embarrassed that they can't be articulate because you know, we all watch you know, we all read and consume news and we watch drama and everything, and it's all very like, you know, headlines are very snappy, but headlines are really hard to write. Like, I mean, I would be allocated just the headline writing job on some of the shifts I did, and I wouldn't write the stories. I would be given the stories; they'd been done by somebody else. I would just extract the headlines from them, and it's true on newspapers. There's different levels of sub editors who will give headline. But you know, if you're a chief executive of an organization or you're the founder of your own business, you almost, it's like people are really hard on themselves. Like they just expect because they have that role and they speak, you know, fluent in one language, that they should therefore be very articulate instantly in that language and think on their feet. And it's sort of a crazy, crazy pressure. I mean, I just don't think we would apply that to, you know, the business accounts or something like that. You wouldn't expect somebody to just kind of like drop them perfectly without studying them and giving them some thought and like, well, what
like, oh, you've never done accounts before. Here you go. Here's the profit and loss. Tell us what we should do with the business.
Yeah, just like doing all hands, like blind, like about your, you know, end of year accounts. Like, you just wouldn't. So I think it's hugely. I think as you know, as humans, we maybe don't kind of like respect communication, how complicated it is and how kind of like bizarre it is. And then certainly in the world of stuff needs to get done and I need people to hear it and do it my way kind of thing, that all goes completely by the wayside. And it does, and I mean, actually, one of the reasons I kind of like crossed the floor from being a journalist to go and to do what I do now was because, especially at Panorama, just like you're saying, really, we would do investigations, and you know, we'd kind of like, it would result in kind of like these big exposés about like losses of like money or businesses or lives even, and almost always when there was an inquiry or whatever happened afterwards, the business would cite communication failure.
Yeah.
Huge reason why this whole thing had sort of snowballed, and how somebody hadn't told somebody something from the beginning, and you know, whatever. And I would sit there and I would feel like sort of a mixture of pride that we sort of shone a light on a problem that was obviously, you know, needed to be kind of like sorted out. But I also felt like increasingly uncomfortable that I was kind of complicit in why people don't speak up, because they're so afraid that they're going to end up, you know, on Panorama kind of thing. And I would think, God, the irony of this is that we as journalists are all sitting around quite comfortably saying to each other, I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to go and find that out. We weren't like covering what we didn't know up. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I thought, God, really, we should take these skills into some of these companies and help them before they get to the point where, you know, they're like, their whole like business model has gone completely askew, or whatever, or, you know, their customers are all very ill or whatever's happening. And so that was my kind of, that was sort of what I was hoping to achieve, was to go and help people take some of these communication skills. I suppose it's writing, but just like word using, and see if there was a way that I could sort of go into organizations and say, it's you know, answer, like, again, take the principles of journalism, like, here's the 6 questions, do you have answers to all 6 questions? If not, that's okay, but how are you going to go and find the answers to them? And just keep that at front of mind in the organization, or, you know, on a project or something all the time. And so I've worked that way quite a lot with people, so that they can, you know, gain clarity on their own thinking and then share it in a clear way.
Yeah, and that bit, I love the way you called it word using as well. I was like, because it's all it's not just writing, is it? It's all of the other things that are involved in word using. It doesn't sound as exciting, word using, but we'll go with it. Is like this idea that we have to get clarity first, But so many people, in fact, almost everyone I speak to, is so overwhelmed with the day-to-day doing of business, with getting stuff done, with trying to make things happen, that actually clarity takes a lot of effort, I think, to get clarity, to make things simple, to be able to kind of narrow it down to 3 most important bullet points, whatever it is you want to do. That stuff takes effort and energy and some engagement and some time to really get to it. So it's no wonder we end up with communication failure in businesses being the things where everything went wrong.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, so like often I think sometimes say what's your sort of like your your top line approach or your philosophy or something, and mine that I sort of teach people is this saying. I'm not really sure where I picked this up, but I think I read it somewhere years ago. It's like clear is kind.
Yeah.
But to communicate clearly takes a lot of work and courage, and it isn't just the gifted few who can communicate clearly. It's this commitment, I think, to the work it takes and the sort of the courage to say stuff like, I don't know, can we make this clearer? I don't understand that. And all these things are very, very hard to say. And I think the other huge like difficulty that we have in the corporate world is that communication is seen as a sort of a linear process where there's some unpacking done, some thinking done, and then it's turned into some messages, and then they're rolled out, and then everybody goes, oh yeah, okay, and that it's almost like a kind of seen as a sort of an end-to-end process, like a sort of a download, like a transfer of
Yeah.
information. But
We've done that now. We can tick that off the project list.
and it is, and the sort of like, and the KPIs will be kind of like, get all stakeholders understanding the 3 key messages or something like that, which is an admirable starting point. Don't get me wrong, but that really isn't like communication is not linear, and I think information is alive. And when you work in, say, a breaking news environment, you're really aware of that. Like, so you'll get kind of like the rumble of something has happened somewhere, and you'll start to kind of report that, and then more facts will come in, and more, and all the time really you're kind of like getting new information, you're sort of testing it, you're trying to turn it into kind of like sort of clear understanding of what is happening, and then the more information you put out, the more it kind of attracts more back in, and then you're sort of doing the process all over again. And I think the thought of that for some people just seems so overwhelming on top of the day job, like that, oh, I'm not even going to be able to tick this off my list kind of thing. I'm going to constantly engage and re-engage with people, just feels very, very like a mammoth task, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But
not one that has the nice result either. Not one that has the, I've achieved this particular thing, because it's so ongoing and so undefinable. And I love what you said there. It's alive. It's like things are coming in and out of it all the time, and you can't really nail it down to anything. So I totally get that. And I'm sitting here thinking as well, communication at the heart of businesses is actually how businesses work or don't work or fail and all of this kind of stuff. Yet how much effort and investment do we put into training, supporting, enabling people to properly communicate in our organizations?
I mean, obviously I would say not enough.
But you can come to you and you can help with that particular one.
Yeah, because I mean, but I would say that I think as well, like what I really struggle to understand, and I think journalism versus corporate world is how complicated the corporate world can make stuff. So in the desire to kind of make it simple, it's just so overcomplicated. and and I think the thing that in journalism is that I suppose what happens is everybody there is taught like fundamentals of communication, like ask these 6 questions, have a meeting, go around the room, who knows what, we don't know, move on, find out. It's very, very structured. And I suppose it's quite hierarchical as well. I mean, you do have the editor there who's ultimately kind of taking decisions with the team, but there isn't ultimately a final decision maker, which probably speeds things up slightly as well. But I do find like I really was astonished when I moved into the corporate world, and people would be running around as if it was a breaking news story, and it was literally the day of their strategy relaunch, and it'd been in their own diaries for a year, like it is all totally in their own control. But the level of panic and stress was like equivalent to a huge sort of like news story breaking, and I found that very surprising. But I think the reason for that is there is possibly not this common training in group communication, and so people are kind of doing all of these things without the skills, which is sort of mad, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and Yeah, if I'm doing, yes, strongly agree. Um, it is, and I'm just sitting here thinking about all the organisations I've worked with, I've worked for, and thinking about how it's always a problem that's trying to be solved without understanding that the problem actually could be solved right at the beginning. It could be solved earlier, but it gets lost, you're right, amongst the complexity of all the other stuff that's going on, and
Yeah,
amongst the kind of size and the whereas maybe the hierarchy in a newsroom is quite small and you can walk up to the editor who makes the final decision, that person in a hierarchy could be 20 steps away from
yeah.
the person who does it and not able to communicate directly with that human because it has to go through 20 levels of other people signing it off before it gets there. So I think some of that size makes a difference as well.
I think it does, and I think also the other thing is like in breaking news, all sort of like news environments. There's a sort of an on-air team and an off-air team. So, but there's the same
Mm,
people, if but at different times of the day. So I would sort of turn up at the start of my shift at News 24 at say 11 a.m. in the morning because there was a shift that I did quite a lot. And for the first, I don't know, like chunk of that shift, I would be in the off-air team. So we would be planning what we were going to be doing when we were on air. And then we would then go on air at 3 o'clock or something like that, and then another
yeah.
team would come in, and then they would be doing the prep, and they would take. And so there was this constant kind of process of time to prepare, time to get handovers from other people, time to just get the lay of the land of like what's already going on, what's already being reported, what could we bring new to this. And I don't think, the corporate world just isn't structured like that. It's like every team is a kind of like, in its own way, is sort of a frontline team.
Yeah.
Expected to, in terms of delivery, they're always like meant to deliver like sort of like what they do. There isn't the kind of like, right, I'm on the first half of the shift, so I'm going to be sort of like seeing where things are going, how we can take them further, and then you do it the second half. And I suppose as well we had an accountability for that because it was our, once we were live on air, we couldn't have just faffed around like for the like
I'm off to get another cup of tea.
well, yeah, I mean, and you just couldn't, and like I said, there's always this terrifying thing of like, what if we have nothing to put on the telly, kind of thing. So it does create a strictness that there, but I do think there are things from that model which really could be, which I try to bring into what I do in the corporate world, and I can see that they work, because they give people are productive, but they are allowed. There's different kinds of productivity, and I think that
Yeah.
becomes more acceptable.
Yeah, amazing. We could go into this in so much detail, but I'm going to have to get us on to our quick fire questions. Otherwise, we'd be fascinated, but other people are probably like, we don't want to listen to a 2-hour podcast.
Yeah, they've got to get back to their
like you just talked about it being concise and simple and kind of really easy, and you've done 2 hours on it. So we will not do that. We will follow our own rules. I've got some quick fire questions for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Question number 1. For you personally, what is always guaranteed to bring you a little bit of work joy?
Well, I've mentioned this before, but I really think it's when somebody says to me, I don't know, or I feel I can say that. I feel like, oh, great, I'm in a really interesting dynamic environment now with this happening. And if I'm new in a role and somebody says to me, I don't know, I feel, oh, great, like they trust me, or, like, trust me enough to be able to say that kind of thing. So I take that as a cue to sort of start problem solving together and an invitation, I think. And I just like the honesty and the creativity of all of that, but also I think it's very efficient
Yeah.
to say that. So I think I hear that and it kind of like brings a bit of a smile to my face. I think, okay, great, well, this is where we are. Let's jump into this. And I think that's just, I would so much rather have that than sit in a meeting for hours where nobody's saying that.
Yeah, but everyone knows that everyone else doesn't know,
Yeah,
and everyone's
pretty
pretending
empowering.
that everyone knows,
Yeah.
and you're just going round and round in circles, like on a carousel, round again,
Yeah.
round again.
And I
Yeah.
worked for a really massive client once, and I was doing this with somebody else as well, and I really admired my co-trainer because we had been booked and paid quite a lot of money to deliver a day of training, and we got to like 2 o'clock. I think we were supposed to train until 4. And my co-trainer sort of said, okay, well, that brings us to what we were going to teach you. So now we've got kind of like 2 hours. What do you want? What most is sort of coming out for you that you don't know, that you want to learn, whatever. And the guy who was the chief executive of this massive organization was like, well, I think what you've pointed out to us is a huge thing that we just don't know in this business. And I thought, oh my God, and the guy was like, so I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there because we need to go and sort this all out. But thank you so much for having the honesty and helping us see this and all this. And it was just, honestly, it was amazing. I was like, but that, I thought, wow, afterwards, it would have been a lot easier for us to have kind of just, felt more comfortable, like kind of ignoring what they didn't know, as it were. And kind of, I don't know. So I felt very proud of that, and I thought, God, if you can do it at that level, then you can do it anywhere. Because that was like,
because it does take some courage, doesn't it? In the world of kind of trying to, be impressive or whatever it is you're trying to be, being able to say that stuff is really important. But you're right. The minute someone says I don't know, that's an invitation to do something about it, right? It's not a I know when you just carry on. It's a let's try and do something differently. How do we get the message across differently? What do we do with it? So I love that. That's great. I'm going to say whenever I talk to you again, I'm just going to say I don't know and just see where the conversation goes. And you'll be like, oh, thanks for giving me some joy today.
Well, a friend of mine says that I sort of say, oh, I don't know, like loads of times.
And they're all like, you're not bringing me work joy because you're just saying I don't know.
What do you know? But no, but I think it's an invitation to collaboration. I think there's an honesty. I think it's refreshing, and I can see when I'm in stuff, and I can see that starting to open up. The whole shoulders go down. It's everybody calms down. Time seems to go at a better pace. It's just a very a good moment, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, love that. Right, question number 2. What book are you currently reading?
So this is going to sound wildly self-promotional because
feel free.
But so I published a book a year ago called Exposure, but much to my delight and surprise, I have to say, it's been translated into Chinese. I didn't know really that this was happening or that I was going to get this book so quickly. It just kind of appeared on the doormat last week, I think it was. And I can't speak or write Chinese at all. So I'm like leafing through this book, just thinking how utterly fascinating that this is like a book I've written. I have no idea, what, what it, how it correlates. Some friends who were in the acknowledgements said to me, oh, are we still in it?
I don't know.
So I leafed to the back, and yes, like it's in Chinese characters, traditional characters, but then it's got like their names written in brackets, like, because I guess I don't know. So I was like, yeah, you're still in there. So they were pleased about that. But as I was leafing through the book, I was thinking how intriguing it was that, and I don't understand this, some words are in brackets and are maybe it's because they're nouns, or I'm not proper nouns, but are still in the English as well, so I can sort of find my way through it. But as I was leafing through it one day, I really laughed because like one of the words in it is tequila. And that seems really quite random, like so
I love that. So and isn't that, I'm going to go quite philosophical back to our thing about like dots on a page that are your words, but you have no idea what they are.
Yes, I mean, this is what I really want to go like learn what some of this is now, because it's completely amazing, isn't it? That's yes, it's just another system for conveying this information or this energy, isn't it? That is fundamentally kind of there. I think one of the Apollo astronauts said that. He said, "Information is energy," and I thought, oh my gosh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I've been like rather mesmerized by my own book in translation. Is that
I love it. No one has ever on this question talked about their own book, and I'm like, there's been a lot of authors. You are the first, so you get an award for being the first to go read my book in Chinese. Love it. Yeah. Question 3. Yeah. What is one bit of advice that somebody has given you in your lifetime that you always find yourself coming back to?
Yeah, so I think the best advice I was ever given was this sort of day one of journalism school was like, ask these 6 questions: this who, what, why, where, when, and how. The teacher who taught it to me called them the 6 cones of investigation. And I've Googled this, and that's nobody else's phrase. So that's his, it must have been what he came up with. But I think his idea being that each question is like a cone, and you ask it and you lift it up and the answer's underneath it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was thinking, how does cone relate to this? But I
thought it was something to do with Aldous Huxley. He was quite into him. I'm not really sure, but I think it's that, like it's a cone, and then underneath it, you pick it up and reveal, like, who something is or what they are or whatever. And oh my gosh, that lesson, that advice has helped me so much. I mean, when I started as a journalist, I really was so overwhelmed by all the words actually, and all the, I
Yeah.
was like, how do I, organize this information? And I teach this almost all the time with every client, no matter what we're doing. I'll sort of do this kind of like can you describe your project or your business or whatever in answer these 6 questions and in around 50 words. Can you get it like that? It doesn't have
Right.
to be beautiful, but if you can get it like that, you're really onto a winner, because humans, for every reason, we're programmed, we just really want answers to these 6 questions as quickly as possible. So the more you can do that, the more engaging you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And those 6 questions are amazing. I think they're brilliant. I loved the addition there that you said, like in 50 words or less, and it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be beautiful. The things I've struggled with in my life is like, I want the words to be perfect the minute they come out of my head and onto a piece of paper, and it doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. I mean, I'm sure about like this year, I was kind of saying to people, don't worry about what it's like. Just get it out. Any old mess. Just who cares if it's duplicated? It really doesn't have to be pretty. It just needs to be answers to these questions, and crunch it down into about 50 words. Don't go too into the details, but don't go too high level, because we need something satisfying in our brains.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and then just go and find a copywriter or somebody and get them to pretty it up. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't. Don't get too attached to that. It's the treasure of what's under these cones is what matters. But now actually, like with stuff like Chat GPT or whatever, in fact, it probably you could just plug this stuff into these things and then get some nice versions back. And I kind of think, well, great, if that helps people get over this barrier and
Yeah.
helps them just get their key information out, then I think that's invaluable. When I was a journalist, like people who could not tell me what their business or their story was, and answer those questions quickly, I just could not engage with them.
Yeah.
And so I saw it in a very brutal light, I suppose. But I do see people who have phenomenally good businesses and good ideas, and they really need to get that sorted out, because otherwise they're kind of like just people just don't get it, and they can't
Yeah.
build momentum and attract what they need to grow their business.
Love that. And those questions are amazing. Definitely work on those. Right. Question for you. Question number 4 is what is one super practical bit of advice that you think our listeners could go away and do today, tomorrow, the next day, whenever they feel like it, that might bring them a little bit more work joy in their lives?
Yeah, so I suppose it's related to what I've just said. So I guess if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I've got this project and it's just not moving fast enough, people just aren't getting it, or we've got our strategy coming, or whatever it is, or maybe you're new at a job and you really want to kind of like make an impact like early on when you have those first key meetings with everybody, then I think my advice would be is just sit there on your own with whatever you've got, like paper or an iPad or whatever, and just think like answers to those questions, like who are you, which is obviously quite easy. That's your name or the name of your project, and then that's the beginning of your story, your 50 words, and then maybe think of the end of your story, which is kind of coming back to that who, but it's like a website or where to check you out or where there's more about your project.
Yeah.
So you're taking the pressure off yourself. You're not having to go into whole details. You're just saying this is what it is, this is where you find out more, and in the middle of that, try and answer these other 5 questions as quickly as as shortly as possible, and then don't feel like give yourself the kind of permission to kind of like practice that
Yeah.
if you're going to be speaking it, or like just start using it consistently when you're writing stuff down about your project, because the more people hear something, the more they trust it. So if you're consistently sort of introducing yourself in the same way or your project in the same way, and even if you're saying, I'm sure we all know what this is, but let's just give you a quick reminder, it's this, people find that deeply comforting.
Yeah.
And so I think that can be a way out of an impasse that you may have in your work, is to just crunch that all down for yourself and then start using that and seeing if that helps energize what you're doing a bit more.
So you can use it on other people, you can use it for yourself, you can use it to and have something there that evolves over time, and you develop it when you're getting things done or need to move things. I really love that. It's a great bit of advice.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
finally, my question for you is, where can people find more about you and your work?
So I've got a website which is cowiecom.com. So it's Cowie, my name, COWIECOM.com. And that has everything on there about the work that I do, and stuff that I offer. And it's got lots of It's got free advice as well about communications. It has a blog that I am a bit inconsistent about, but it does.
It's there. There are things there.
There's some stuff there. And sort of interviews and videos and things like that. So there's kind of like there's sort of free tools there, and then there's information about how to, if there's stuff about the book, and then there's stuff about if you want to work with me. So people can find out everything.
Brilliant. We'll put that in the show notes as well so that people can click straight on through. Felicity, thank you so much for being a guest today and for such a wonderful conversation. I have really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so have I. Thank you so much, Beth. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for listening to the WorkJoy Jam podcast, and a huge thank you to Felicity for joining me and talking all about her career history, some of the things that have really helped her, some of the learning, some of the difficult stuff, the challenge, as well as the successes. So thank you, Felicity. There are lots of different things that I am thinking about from this conversation and that I am going to be really concentrating on after this. And the first one is about how writing can be a team sport. And I've always thought of it as a very solo thing. So I'm going to think about how I might bring more of that team aspect, more people into the game of writing for me. And the other one is about this idea that communication isn't a linear process. It's alive, it's living, it's something that is constantly changing and updating itself. And therefore, trying to treat any kind of communication like a linear process might not get us the best results. Thanks again, Felicity, for joining us. Do remember that there are many other episodes. Go and pick and mix some of the WorkJoy Jam podcast episodes from the last 6 series that you might be interested in. And do sign up for my freebies. They're on the website, createworkjoy.com. There's one which is all about tracking and understanding where you get your workjoy from. It's called WorkJoy, Where Do You Get Yours? And the other is if you're feeling a bit meh about your job right now, is how to fall back in love with your job. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you again next time.